I want to start today's episode with a situation I see far more often than families expect. A parent passes away, there is an estate plan, there is a trust, and yet the family is suddenly fractured. Siblings stop speaking, accusations start flying, and what was supposed to make things easy turns into court filings, mediation, and years of emotional and financial stress. Here's the hard truth: estate planning doesn't fail on paper, it fails in real life. And most families don't understand that difference until it's too late. I'm Dale Corpus, a senior transition specialist and seniors real estate expert based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm also part of the sandwich generation myself, and I created this podcast, Simplify Senior Transitions, to make confusing, emotional, and high stakes decisions around aging parents easier to navigate. My promise to you is simple. Every episode brings you real stories, practical tools, and expert insight so your family can move forward with confidence instead of stress. Today's conversation is an important one, especially for families who think they've already done everything right. My guest is Mika Domingo, founder and managing attorney of MS Domingo Law Group. Mika isn't just an estate planner. She's a probate and trust litigator, a certified mediator, and someone who sees what happens after families disagree. She works at the intersection of law, conflict, and family dynamics. And today, she's going to help us understand what really happens when estate plans are tested or when loved ones pass away without an estate plan. This is the episode families need before conflict starts. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Simplify Senior Transitions podcast, where we help families navigate senior living, real estate, and everything in between. Hosted by Senior Transition Specialist Dale Corpus, this show brings you expert insights, real solutions, and stress-free strategies to make senior transitions simple. Ready to dive in? Let's go.
And we're back, everybody. Mika, welcome to the show today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Dale, for having me on your show.
You're welcome, Mika. So before we get into the heavy stuff, can you share a bit about your professional background and how you came to focus on trust, probate, and litigation?
Sure. I began my legal career as a deputy attorney general, where I gained substantial experience handling complex disputes and representing the state in high stakes matters. Over time, I realized that what I enjoyed most was resolving conflict and helping people navigate difficult situations. That led me to private practice, where I shifted my focus to trust and estates. The practice turned out to be great. It's a great fit for me for several reasons. First, trust and estates work often involves resolving disputes at emotionally charged moments, and I bring both a problem-solving mindset and a sensitivity to discuss issues with families who are facing very difficult times. And second, I genuinely enjoy working with people.
So you've worked in both public and private sectors. How has that shaped the way you approach families in crisis?
I learned by working in private and public sectors that families in crisis, they really don't need more legal jargon.
Okay.
They don't. They need clarity. They need someone who understands what they're going through. So having worked in the public sector, that helped sharpen my sense of fairness and systems. And the private sector showed me how to really understand people on a personal level and understand their disputes. So I try to bring both perspectives into every case.
Yeah. Now, when did you first realize that estate planning and estate conflict are two very different worlds?
I would say very early on. Planning is really aspirational. People think about what they want to happen, right? They think about their intentions. That's really the focus, right? And conflict happens in real life. We don't know when, we don't know how, right?
Right.
Whether it's grief or old resentments and power struggles, those show up. And you can have this amazing plan that can still fall apart, right? If the healing side isn't addressed.
Right. Now, what do you wish families understood about probate and trust disputes before they ever need an attorney?
That's a little tough, right? Because families are different. Some families may have more reasonable expectations. But I do wish that families knew that probate and trust disputes, they're usually not about the law. They happen when people are grieving, when they're stressed out or feeling unheard, and these emotions tend to take over faster than anyone expects. So what starts as a disagreement can quickly become expensive,
Yeah.
time consuming, and damaging.
Just to backtrack a little bit too, for my audience that doesn't know you, can you tell me where you're based out of and what area you cover?
Yes. So our main office, we are in downtown Walnut Creek, and we work with families across the state. So we've appeared in over 25 counties across the state.
Now, let's segue into estate plans versus real life. I know most families assume that having a trust means they'll avoid conflict. Why isn't that always true?
Yes, I wish, right? I wish we could just have these documents prepared, executed, and that's it. Many families hope that that will be the case,
Yeah.
but a trust is really a legal tool, right? It's representation of the family's intentions. It doesn't really resolve underlying family dynamics. So if there's, let's say, a long-standing disagreement or tension, unclear expectations, those don't disappear just because you have this well-written document. So problems don't really get resolved just because you have the legal documents in place. And actually, Dale, sometimes these documents can expose those problems.
Yeah, I get that. In your experience, what are the most common triggers that cause estate plans to break down?
Yeah, so breakdown, let's see. I would say unclear terms,
Mhm.
right? We do our best to represent intention, but sometimes in the distribution scheme, still not as clear. Also, perceived favoritism, right? Or let's face it, surprise distributions.
Mhm. Is conflict usually about money or something else?
Honestly, it's almost never just about money. Money is the thing that people argue about, right? Because it's
Right?
concrete and it's easy to point to. But underneath that, it's usually about emotions that can go way back, right? It's about sometimes feeling left out or feeling like a parent favored one child over another, or feeling like someone, this happens, I see this a lot too. Someone finally has control after years of not having it. So I often see how families react to the distribution scheme, for example, and the real message to them is, oh, I was not seen, right? I wasn't valued, or what we hear often,
Yeah.
what? This isn't fair. And grief is layered on top of that.
Yeah. Family dynamics are very interesting. Sometimes, like adult children, they go back to the roles they were when they were kids and the siblings, there's a power struggle too. And so, that being said, like, how often do you see sibling dynamics from decades ago resurface during probate or trust disputes?
It happens quite a bit. And I like what you said about, sometimes, it's when they go back to when they were young, right? Have siblings in their, what, 50s, 60s, suddenly they're arguing like they're teenagers again.
Yeah.
And those old roles resurface. So what probate does is remove the parent, right? Because the,
Right.
the parent is deceased, right? They remove the parent who used to hold the family structure together, right?
Right.
And once that's gone, unresolved dynamics don't stay buried.
Yeah.
They oftentimes, rush to the surface. And because they're grieving, this emotional tolerance is much lower and things can escalate faster than families can expect.
Right. What role does unclear communication play in these situations?
I would say unclear communication that plays a huge role. I would say maybe one of the biggest. When parents don't explain their intentions while they're alive, everyone is left to interpret the plan on their own, right? Earlier I talked about surprises.
Yeah.
And people don't really, let's face it, people don't interpret things neutrally.
Mhm.
They interpret things emotionally. Because for me as an attorney, I can see, okay, this goes to this person. But the beneficiaries will say, instead of saying, okay, that's the scheme, that's the schedule, they see this this is what mom meant. It's not what she wanted,
Yeah.
right?
Get
So
that.
those communications ahead of time, even though they don't guarantee to avoid conflict, they can be very helpful.
Okay. Let's segue into probate and trust litigation. For families listening who have never been through it, what does probate or trust litigation actually look like?
Okay. If they haven't been through it, very likely they might have read about it, right? Sometimes, I hope. For families, this process, whether it's a probate administration or trust administration or litigation, it's more formal, right? Because we have to follow the rules. We have to follow procedural rules. And it can be very slow and emotionally draining than they expect. It involves lots of court filings and deadlines, hearings, and a lot of waiting. That's the part that can be frustrating because sometimes there are continuances because the court might want more information. And let's face it, sometimes the hearings don't get scheduled until 3 or 4 months. Although with probate now, there's a local rule. There are local rules that allow for hearings to be scheduled within 45 days of filing.
Okay. And what tends to surprise families the most once legal conflict begins?
Yeah, I would say what tends to surprise them, how impersonal the process can feel and how quickly relationships deteriorate. So once lawyers get involved, we're focused on what we need to do. And we don't want to waste time. Sometimes the clients want to spend a little bit more time really digging into things and, what we call venting, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay, but we also need to redirect because we want to know when we're doing fact gathering what we need in order to prepare the documents. And that can feel very impersonal.
Mm-hmm. How quickly can the emotional and financial costs escalate?
Very quickly, Dale.
Mhm.
Very quickly. Financially, even the small disputes can snowball into significant legal fees.
Mhm.
And emotionally, the toll often shows up even fast, right? Because they're already stressed.
Mhm.
They're anxious and they lose sleep and damage, permanent damage can happen to these relationships, family relationships. And families are sometimes shocked by how consuming the process becomes.
Yeah. Are there early warning signs that conflict is heading toward litigation that families should not ignore?
Yes. Yeah. There are warning signs, and it's one of the most important things families can understand. Litigation rarely comes out of nowhere. There are usually signs long before anyone files anything. For example, communication. When does communication start breaking down? When family members stop talking to each other because they're so upset at what happened, or they're just grieving, and they start communicating through text instead of picking up the phone when they used to do that, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
And another warning sign I would say is just lack of, just secrecy, right?
Yeah.
Let's say someone has documents and they're not sharing the documents. Decisions aren't explained, or one person suddenly has control and they don't want to tell anyone. It goes back to communication,
Yeah.
right? And the conversation shift from how are you doing? Can we help you with this administration? Instead of that, the conversations shift to what are my rights?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Instead of how do we handle this together?
When should a family seek legal guidance before things explode?
Timing is key, right? Well, much earlier, I would think, much earlier than when they think. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to request for some a discovery call. Legal guidance isn't just for lawsuits. It's often most valuable when things are still what we call salvageable. If emotions are escalating, then trust isn't there, or family members they're starting to feel anxious or suspicious. That's the moment to bring in help.
Okay. Let's move on to something new for my podcast. Let's talk a little bit about conservatorships. You're the first expert that's able to talk about this, so I want to expose this to my audience. So, conservatorships are often misunderstood. At a high level, what are they designed to do?
Their core conservatorships are meant to protect people who can't manage their either personal or financial affairs on their own. They can't manage because they don't understand or they lack capacity. Conservatorships are designed to they're for safety reasons, right? To make
Yeah.
sure someone is housed, right? To make sure someone is cared for and they're protected when they're vulnerable. Protect the elderly from scams, right? And the problem is that conservatorships are a very powerful legal tool. They transfer the decision-making authority from that person, what we call the conservatee, to another person, the conservator. And it's often across many areas of life. It's not just, somebody's a conservator for the estate, they're handling the finances, but that affects everything else. Like, okay, if they want to go to Costco or they want to, go to a restaurant, they don't just no longer have access to their money, right? Because their conservator now takes over. And because of that, the courts use the standard, the least restrictive means. Is the conservatorship absolutely necessary? So because of that, the conservatorship should be used very carefully and thoughtfully, and ideally when there are least restrictive options available.
Now, when do conservatorships genuinely help and when do they become problematic?
Okay, as far as when they can be very helpful, they can be incredibly helpful in cases involving advanced dementia, right?
Mhm.
Those who have severe cognitive impairment or serious exploitation.
Yeah.
Someone is making decisions for them and influencing them to transfer funds or make decisions that they would normally not do, but for this diagnosis, right? In those cases, I mean, I can list so many examples because we're seeing a lot of these cases come in more so than before. In those cases, a conservatorship can bring structure, oversight, and the most important thing is safety.
Mhm.
You also ask about when does it become a problem?
Yep.
Yeah, so they become problematic when they're used as a first solution instead of a last resort, right?
Mm.
Or when they remove more autonomy than necessary because maybe you have a conservatee who just needs help with the finance but doesn't really need help with the other things, you know, health, for example, decision making because they still understand, right?
Right.
And when it's in place, when the conservatorship is in place because of conflict or convenience, the
Mhm.
the siblings don't want to take care of their parent and they want someone else, a fiduciary, rather than incapacity. That's where things often can go wrong.
A related question is what warning signs suggest a conservatorship may be unnecessary or being misused?
Yeah, I like that question because it's very practical, right? People have misconceptions. What warning signs? Some of the biggest red flags, I would say, include lack of transparency when the conservator doesn't provide information. In a conservatorship, oftentimes the conservatee is appointed an attorney. So there's protection there, right? But other red flags would be limited oversight and the conservatorship, the conservatees being excluded from
Mhm.
any decisions because there is that attorney, right, for them. So the attorney should always be kept informed so that the conservatee knows what's going on to the extent that they can understand what's going on.
Yeah. What alternatives should families consider before pursuing a conservatorship?
There are often less restrictive options that work very well when families plan early. So, for example, I talked about managing the estate, right? The
Mhm.
conservatorship of the estate. Well, powers of attorney can be helpful, right? If there's a power of attorney, then you have that agent who can make decisions in the event of incapacity. Trust, right? Trust support decision making arrangements. Maybe in the trust, there's language that says in the event, there needs to be additional care, trustee has the discretion to sell the property for continuing care, for additional care, whatever the situation might be. The key is timing. Sometimes families wait until it's too late. The person can no longer speak, for example, and they didn't think about these alternatives. Well, it would be the person who no longer has capacity, right? But families can affect also the decision making and can encourage each other to have those testamentary instruments in place.
So I know you're also a certified mediator. And actually, I want to learn about this too. When is mediation a better option than full litigation?
So, Dale, I've been mediating longer than I've been an attorney. So, my answer is biased, of course. Mediation is usually the better choice When families want control over the outcome and care even a little about preserving relationships, mediation is the way to go.
Okay.
Okay. It really is. Most cases go to mediation anyway. And in our system, our probate court, and in our trusts and probate world, under Breslin, the courts are encouraged to order early mediation. And in contrast, litigation can, it's just not, I'm a litigator and I will litigate if we have to,
Yeah.
right? But I focus on efficiency, right? How do we resolve without the families incurring so much money? Because the litigation, the decision is handed over to a court, which can feel like a loss of control for everyone involved. Whereas in mediation, family are there willingly and with their good faith effort to resolve, right? They have the space to speak their truth, to be heard, and try to resolve things. And it's not about winning or proving a point, but it's really about solving a problem in a way that the families can live with.
Well, what makes mediation successful in estate and trust disputes?
Successful mediation can be very successful when the parties, the families understand that this is their opportunity to be heard and opportunity to resolve. And it starts with transparency and preparation. When people come in, they're open minded, right?
Mhm.
They're willing to listen. It's really about listening, right? And
Mhm.
being honest. And even if, let's say, they're angry, mediation can still be very effective if they're prepared. It also helps when they understand that this is not about winning, right?
Mhm.
It's about finding this path forward that everyone can live with.
Mhm. On the flip side, when does mediation not work?
Oh, yeah. Oh boy. Yeah. So mediation struggles, right? Mediations that last until midnight and start at 9 or 10 and last at midnight and still don't settle. But I'm very happy to share that, oftentimes we're able to resolve through mediation. And I've had amazing mediators to work with. So when does mediation not work? When someone comes in and they're determined to punish the other person, right? Because they're so mad that they're just there, not in good faith, but they want to punish. And it's pointless because you're not going to get what you want. Because what you want, you think that's the only thing that should happen.
Are there any
And
stories that you could even illustrate with that? I'm just trying to paint a picture.
yeah, so we've had, actually, this one ended up settling, but we had to do a second mediation. But during the first one, the person who came in really wanted to speak about what happened when they were young. Has nothing to do with the issues. And that's when you were not nice to me or you're not fair. And now you're getting this.
Yeah.
Why is the distribution scheme unfair? Right. And so all these hours of trying to go back to issues that were unresolved. But we ended up eventually settling this one by the second one. But it did take a while because the person wanted to express how angry they were until that time, right? They
Yeah.
didn't resolve it. And they were just not there to be sincere about the outcome, but they're trying to strategize.
Yeah. Again, you're dealing with unresolved family dynamics and emotions. So I'm going to bring up the topic of emotional intelligence. What role does emotional intelligence play in resolving these conflicts?
Emotional intelligence in any space, right, is essential in trying to resolve these conflicts because the disputes are often they're fueled by grief. Grief is there and fear.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned, longstanding family dynamics going back to when they were little, right?
Mhm.
And when those emotions are ignored, then that conflict intensifies. Emotional intelligence is very important because when people feel heard and understood, even if they don't get exactly what they want, they're far more open to compromise. Of course, emotional intelligence doesn't replace legal expertise, but it makes things more effective.
Yeah. Have you seen mediation save relationships that otherwise would have been permanently damaged?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Many times, actually, many times they don't talk to each other. And usually, when you start a mediation, they're in separate rooms.
Right.
You want to get a feel for things. Do they want to talk to each other? The mediator will suggest maybe a caucus, right? Mediation doesn't fix everything, but it can stop the bleeding. And I've seen siblings go from complete estrangement to being able to communicate respectfully again. And sometimes that's a start. I have this one case that seemed hopeless because they're siblings and they didn't want to speak to each other for all these various reasons and issues that arose throughout the litigation process. We mediated. Everyone was satisfied. Nobody won, but was satisfied with the outcome. And they spoke for the first time in years,
Hmm.
right? Just the start of the conversation. And 6 months later, my client tells me that, hey, they're going to have lunch.
Let's segue into some advice. I mean, prevention and maybe some takeaways. Like, what steps can parents take now to reduce the likelihood of conflict later?
Now is a good time to make sure that you're not only do you have clear planning, right? And the excellent testamentary instruments that reflect your intention, but now is a time to start talking to your loved ones, your children, about your intentions, honest conversations. Let's say someone is getting more than the other. Well, one is getting more than the other siblings, and the parents think it's because that person didn't receive percentages early on because they're younger, right? Or everyone else, their education was financed all the way up to PhD level. So in the distribution scheme, the other person is getting more because by the time, they're anticipating if, in the event of death, early death, then they would have to make sure that there's allocation for that person who didn't already receive. But the parents need to explain that early on. Maybe not in so many details, but just honest conversations. That's key. You don't have to disclose every detail, but you have to explain your intentions. And that can really reduce future resentment, right? And choosing the right people to carry out the plan. Like, who are you going to appoint as your successor trustee and why? How come the middle child got to be successor trustee and not the others, right? You have a reason, but
Mhm.
maybe have that conversation now.
Mhm. And how important is choosing the right trustee or executor? And what mistakes do families make here?
Yeah, I think it's very critical. I think it's important to choose based on so many factors, right? Not
Uh,
just who's in the area, who wants to do it, who's a responsible person, right? Families often choose based on birth order, proximity, or emotion rather than ability and neutrality. And the wrong choice can ignite conflict immediately. So a trustee or an executor is someone that needs it's a fiduciary role, right? It's someone that needs judgment, communication skills, and you talked about emotional intelligence, emotionally intelligent,
Yeah.
not just good intentions. So it's very critical.
And should adult children be included in estate conversations earlier than they usually are?
And we were saying adults like 21 and over, right? Yeah,
Yes.
often yes, at least at a high level. Every inclusion manage expectations and reduce their prices. So if you're not saying anything, then that tends to create suspicion, right? Especially after a parent passes away.
Okay. Now, how can professionals like realtors, financial advisors, care managers, other senior living professionals help families avoid these breakdowns?
Professional, the ones you mentioned, I'm just very grateful that I have a lot of them. Because these professionals like financial advisors, realtors, and care managers and the senior transition specialists, they often see the issues long before attorneys do, right?
Right?
They see them. And oftentimes they've known these clients, right, for a while by the time conflict arises and they come to us, right? So these professionals, they encourage transparency and collaboration, and they can really help prevent conflicts before these conflicts become legal disputes.
Yeah, I understand. Now, if you could correct one major misconception families have about estate planning, what would it be?
One misconception. Well, I would say the misconception that once something is in place, your estate plan, right? Once there are well-written documents,
Yeah.
that will be it. The documents would prevent conflict. And estate planning works best when legal planning is paired with communication.
Mhm.
are the people involved, are the family members aware of what's happened, how things don't have to be specific, as I mentioned, but at least have the conversation. They want to be kept informed, right? And so that they will have realistic expectations.
Yeah. And what advice would you give adult children already sensing tension in their family?
If they're sensing tension, pay attention, right? Pay attention. Don't ignore it. Address it if you can. Keep the lines of communications open because tension will not resolve itself. Tension usually, it doesn't go away on its own. We know that, right? And it can really harden over time. So for adult children, I think it's important to ask respectful questions. You don't ask your mom and dad, so what am I getting? So you would ask respectful questions. What would you like me to be prepared for, right? Did you assign a role? It's important to have that conversation early and really stay curious rather than accusatory, right? Did you get me something? Like, I want that wedding ring, because she already got that. You don't want that, right? Sometimes opening the door to conversation can really prevent years of misunderstanding later. And it's also important to get support sooner than later. That might mean talking with a professional. We talked about all these various professionals, right? Who know sometimes intimately like what's going on in the people's lives. Talk to a mediator maybe early on what could happen if this goes into litigation. Have a consult or an attorney to help you simply understand the landscape, not to start a fight.
Now, what does truly successful outcome look like to you?
In general, I would say a truly successful outcome would be, it's not about the win, right? It's not about who wins, or it's about minimizing the harm. It's not just about the assets. Sometimes it's really not just about the assets. So it's minimizing the emotional strain and the financial strain. So if we can resolve early, then it minimizes the strain. And a successful outcome would be when families move through a very difficult and incredibly difficult process and still have some respect, right? Dignity and clarity. And really the damage, can you salvage this relationship?
Mhm.
Sometimes success looks like resolution and reconciliation.
And as we come to a close on this episode, any final words, or what's one thing you hope every listener takes away from today's conversation?
Thank you for that. I like that question because we want to give some insight, not legal advice, of course, but just sort of an encouragement. So
Right.
I would say that planning early, right? Communicating openly and seeking guidance before a crisis can change everything. There are so many resources around. Legal tools work best when they're paired with honest conversations and an understanding of the human side of family conflict. And
Mhm.
most importantly, families don't really have to navigate these situations alone, right? And you see this a lot, and you do a lot of work helping, right, Dale? There are so many resources. They don't have to navigate alone. Help exists. Reaching out early can prevent years of pain later.
Yeah. Mika, thank you. Thank you so much, truly, for bringing such clarity and honesty to a topic most families hope they'll never have to face. What you share today reinforces something I say often on this podcast. Planning isn't just about documents, it's about people, communication, expectations, and emotions. And when those conversations are delayed or avoided, families often pay for it emotionally, financially, and relationally. So, if this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with a sibling, a parent, or a professional who supports families through transitions. These conversations can feel uncomfortable, but avoiding them almost always makes things harder later. And if you found value in today's episode, I'd really appreciate you taking a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more families discover the show and get guidance before a crisis forces the conversation. Just so you know, the podcast is often the starting point. Behind the scenes, I also work closely with families and professionals navigating complex senior transitions. This is the Simplify Senior Transitions podcast, where the goal is to make senior care decisions less overwhelming, more transparent, and more human. For more episodes, resources, and ways to connect, visit www.simplifyseniortransitions.com. And as always, You don't have to navigate these transitions alone. Thank you for listening or watching. Thank you, Mika, one last time for being on this episode with me today.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And for the rest of you, I'll see you on the next episode of the Simplify Senior Transitions podcast.